Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar on how to use Apple Pattern of Life data in your investigations with Apollo and BlackLight. My name is Julie O'Shea and I'm the Manager of Global Marketing here at BlackBag. Before we get started, there are a few things I'd like to review. This webinar is being recorded today, so we'll share an on-demand version when the webinar is complete. If you have any questions, please submit them in the questions window and we will answer them throughout and in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Sarah Edwards. Sarah is a senior digital forensics researcher here at BlackBag. She works in the DC metro area, specializing in Mac and mobile forensics. She has worked with various federal law enforcement agencies and has performed a variety of investigations, including computer intrusions, criminal and counterintelligence, and terrorism and narcotics. Sarah's research interests include anything and everything Apple related, mobile devices, digital profiling, and Mac and mobile device security. She has presented at many industry security and forensic conferences and is the author and instructor of the SANS course on Mac forensic analysis and incident response. Thanks for joining us today, Sarah, and if you are ready, I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, go ahead and get started now. So welcome everyone. This is BlackLight and Apollo. I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite utility thus far. And it is, of course, Apollo. I've been spending quite a bit of time on this, speaking, researching, doing all sorts of stuff for about a year and a half now. So it was originally released, I think, about October, November of 2018. So it's been quite a while. So this is a open source Python script that I wrote, and the modules are where the gold really is at. Throw up the GitHub link there so you can take a look at that. That will also be shown to you at the very end of the presentation. But I basically created this to save myself work. That's why anybody truly scripts, right? So there are quite a few databases, and I'm going to specifically kind of focus on iOS for this particular presentation. So there's quite a few databases that each one holds something of forensic value. Sometimes they hold a few different things of forensic value. So I took maybe these 20 different databases or so, and I created a SQL query to extract every little piece of data that I could out of them that I found forensically useful. And this is where Apollo came into being. I didn't have really the time to do this over and over and over again, so Apollo really just does it for me. So it's called the Apple Pattern of Life Lazy Outputter, and it truly is lazy. It just outputs to a SQLite or a CSV output. The output is not pretty, but it does get the job done. It does save a little bit of time. And it's extracting some pattern of life items here. So a lot of these we're going to be talking about in this particular presentation, but everything from applications the user has used, their health data, device status, whether it's on, off, plugged in, whatnot, location, where the device was at a given point in time, and quite a few more subjects as we go along. So as far as the modules go, this is what BlackLight is actually using. It doesn't really use the Python script as is, but it's really using the modules, and that's where the really hard research has gone into. So this is a sample module right here, and I just want to point out a few different pieces to this. So this one is for the call history stored data database, but there's a few different parts to this particular module. At the top here, we have the module metadata that basically says who made it, what's it all about. The database metadata, this one's important. This one has the database that it's going to perform the SQL query on. So if it can't find this database, the query will not be executed on that. So if you are exporting these out, and you might have like call history.storedata1 or 2, depending on how you're extracting these from different softwares, just make sure that the file names are truly the same. The platform here, we're working mostly with iOS right now. I do hope to have some Mac support a little bit later on this year, as well as the versions. So in this example, we have the call history database, which really hasn't changed in quite a few different versions. So everything from iOS 8 all the way up to iOS 13. Next section here, this is where I'm going to have different activities and calls and key timestamps. This is not going to be relevant for the BlackLight version of this, but it is if you are using the Python script. And the very last piece, likely the most important of them all, this is the query. So I went in and I pulled a SQL query. I'm basically extracting everything that I think is forensically interesting and throwing it in here. So some of these are smaller, some of them are quite a bit more lengthy, and I'll show you one that's a little bit more intense a little bit later on in this presentation. So that is a module. At this point, I have about 165 different modules on my GitHub across all varieties of different events and activities. Now, I do say that this is mostly an iOS thing right now. Mac is coming soon, but if you just happen to be in BlackLight with the Mac image and you go in there and see if it works, it will just work. There are some databases that are named the same that the queries will work on. So that is fortunate with that one. So sometimes the databases aren't necessarily the same across platforms, but every once in a while you do get lucky. Now, as far as BlackLight's Apollo plugin, so they came out with this one a few versions ago. We have a new icon at the top bar there. It looks like a little puzzle piece. It's called plugins. We'll click to this. I'll show you an example of this one in just a little bit. But this is where you're going to see the Apollo information embedded into the BlackLight tool. Now, a few things that I do want to mention. BlackLight is currently being shipped with an older version. Frankly, if it's been more than 3 days, it's going to be an older version because I keep updating all these different modules. I've been updating quite a bit in the last couple weeks or so while putting this presentation together because I'm like, ooh, I want to put this in there, or I think I should extract this, or make this look a little bit different. So you might want to always go to my GitHub and download the latest and greatest and install it. So when you do open the Apollo Manage Plugins, or excuse me, the Plugins Manage Plugins page, you will have a version there. This one's already old. I haven't actually updated this one in a couple days. And you want to install it using the install. Oops. So when you click the install button, it's going to ask to point to the Apollo master.zip file. You want to make sure it is in fact the zip file. If you go to this download zip off of GitHub and you're in Safari, default settings, it's going to want to unpack that zip because of safe downloads and all sorts of stuff. My usual fix for this without mucking around with those settings is to go to Chrome, download it there, and then go back to Safari. So just a heads up with that. I only tell you this because it's made me a little bit angry in the past. It needs to be in a zip file format. So I'm going to take a very quick tour of the basics of the BlackLight Apollo plugin in just a second. But just to give you an idea of the data that I'm going to be looking at today, it is from one of my test devices. I've been running around with this for about 5-6 weeks or so, about just after Christmas, give or take. This is an iPhone 10. It's running the latest 13.3, I guess the latest is 13.3.1, but 13.3 for this particular one. And I did a full file system extraction using the Checkra jailbreak. So when I imported into BlackLight, it was all in a folder format. So let me switch screens here a little bit. So I have two different, oops, let me get the zoom to work here. I have two different extractions. This iPhone X 13.3, this is my full file system extraction. I'll show you that one in just a little second. And I did the same phone using an encrypted backup, just to show you the quick differences between extractions. You're going to get the most value out of this with a full file system. You can still get a few different things from an iTunes style backup, but just not as many things because these databases, they're sensitive, they do not get backed up. So I have Dot's iPhone here, this is my test device. I clicked over to the plugins view over here with that little puzzle piece, and you're gonna see this Apollo-master here and a number. This number is the number of records it found across 20 some different databases. So if I open up this one a little bit, we can see that they've been organized by the database names here. I can click through some of these things like the health database. So health database has quite a few things. Health database also gets embedded into an encrypted backup. This is why we get to see it here. But you will notice that a few of these are missing. They have a lot of 0 records next to them. Those are likely going to be stored in the full file system versus the iTunes style backup. So each one of these is a separate Apollo module. There's one for heart rate, there's one for steps, there's one for every time I stand, one for weight, and so on and so forth. And there's going to be different records for each one. So each one of these is a different SQL query on the health database. Now we got, just to give you an idea, we got about just over 16,000 records from this particular device. They were captured more or less at the same time, one right after another. If I click over to the full file system, let it do its loading thing, it went from 16,000 to over 200,000. So you can see there's quite a bit more data here. So if you can get access to that full file system, I highly recommend doing that. So you see a lot more population of different records in here. Now, as far as updating it, just to show you that, we're going to go to the Manage Plugins section here. I think it went to my other screen. Let me bring that over. There we go. So I have a version up here. This is the latest version that I have right now for BlackLight. So it's January 27th of 2020. Always make sure to check that version. I'm always updating these different modules. Let me do one more thing. So as far as kind of navigating through these, you'll just click down into the thing that you want to take a look at. In this case, we have call history here. We have the knowledge database here, app activities. You can click through each one of these and kind of get a feeling for what you might see in here. You're going to find timestamps. There's going to be strings. There's going to be bundle IDs. Every different query is going to be, you know, holding something different. That's why I had to create a module for every little piece in here. Each one is going to be different. All right, so let's get to the first scenario. I want to track wallet purchases. Now these scenarios, they're a little bit, you know, somewhat contrived, very loosely based, but I just want to show you different questions that you can answer with some of the Apollo data. So I have the wallet application here. And if you're an iPhone user, you might have already used this before. You can have your Starbucks gift card in there. You can have credit cards associated in there. And each one works a little different. You got the Apple Cash card, you know, you got the fancy metal card. You might have that in there as well. So this is an example from the phone that I'm taking an analysis of. So I got an Amex gift card in there acting as a credit card and a Starbucks card associated with that. So a couple of questions I would like to answer. What cards do I have available? You know, sometimes you won't be able to actually look at the device. You might just have the dump of the device. You want to see which cards the user had available. Were any of them used to purchase goods? Where were they used? What was potentially purchased? So we're going to focus here on the Apollo modules under the Passes 23 section. So Passes 23 is the database name for all of this wallet information. All right. So under Passes 23, I have unique passes and cards, wallet passes, and then different transactions. So there's 3 different queries on the Passes 23 database. First one I'm going to take a look at is the unique passes and cards. So show me all the different cards that are available, whether they're credit cards, whether they're movie passes, Starbucks, you know, hotel stays, flights, all of that different information in there. So I have 3 different unique ones here. I have Starbucks, you got the default Apple one, and we have Amex. They have different identifiers, more or less bundle IDs, quite a few different timestamps in here as well. And I want to specifically talk about the ingested time. That could be quite useful. That's when I imported that card into the wallet application. You notice that 2 of these, if I sort by ingested date, were imported almost around the same time, about that 1756, that 1801 on January 7th. So you might be able to use that in some of your investigations as well. So I got 3 different cards. Next up, talk about the passes. So the passes, we have one for Apple and then one for Starbucks. Showed you kind of that one before. And most importantly are the transactions. So we got some transactions. Each one has a transaction date here. If I sort by them, I have 2 transactions on January 8th and a 3rd transaction on January 19th. Zoom in a little bit. All of them were done through the American Express card. I have the amount here. These are in US dollars, so about $10.15 and then $10.64. The merchant name. Now the merchant information, sometimes it's filled in, sometimes it's not, depending on the merchant and the card. We have Target, Chick-fil-A, and a restaurant called Bun Me. If I keep scrolling over here, these two columns, peer payment handle, peer payment memo, they are not filled in because I've mostly seen these populated when you send or receive Apple Cash. So if you are interested in that for your investigations, certainly take a look at this. If my friend Heather wanted to send me some Apple Cash, and I ask her to send me money all the time, say, hey Heather, send me $25. Her handle will come up here, her email address, her phone number, what have you, and the memo might be here. It says, hey, thanks for the cheese and wine, you know, something to that effect. We also have some location information. So we got some location dates, some times, or excuse me, timestamps associated with the location, as well as lat and longs. Not every transaction is going to potentially have geolocation information embedded in there. You notice this middle one right here. This one is from Chick-fil-A. This one does not have that information, but this can also be useful to have in here. So we have 3 different transactions. So going back to the presentation, this is what the user would see in their iOS device. If I click the American Express gift card, I have 3 transactions, Banh Mi, Chick-fil-A, and Target, 2 of which are on the same day. Pretty close together when we look at those transaction timestamps as well. So I'm going to focus on some of the events occurring during this time period a little bit later and throughout the presentation. But we have a few questions here. You know, I see some location information in there. If I click through them as a user, I can see some maps and what amount I you know, basically purchased with these. I see some timestamps in here. I'd like to mention, if you are an iOS user and you use these devices, if you see it in the GUI, it has to be stored somewhere. So always, if you're looking for something of interest, use that as your hint to go find that in a particular database. So these are all the things that I just showed you in that passes 23 database. We've already parsed out all the information on all these screens. Now, we might need a little bit more context. So I got these 3 transactions, but I still have this Starbucks gift card. The balance, you'll notice, is at $25.49. Passes 23 app doesn't really tell you that information. But we can go and get this information elsewhere. Also, that $15 at Chick-fil-A looks a little bit too even. I don't know anybody who's ordered $15 worth of food at Chick-fil-A. So we might want to investigate that a little closer. So if I have the Starbucks gift card open, as a user, I can go in here and I can click this little Starbucks icon in the corner, and it's going to open up the Starbucks application in the iPhone itself. Now I can click through here, I can order, I can look at my cards, I can look at the receipts, I can look at, you know, all the stars I have accumulated through Starbucks. Again, if you see it in the app, very likely it's going to be stored somewhere in the data, unless they're pushing it down from the cloud over and over again, which some applications certainly do. So keep that in mind too. However, Starbucks definitely keeps some of this information being stored in their own application here. So they keep it in a file called SBX history. Let me zoom in a little bit. SBX history. No file name, just a file called SBX history. So I go in and I find this one. I use the BlackLight file filter to do this. It makes it extremely easy to get to that data if I know what I'm looking for. So click this one. I'm gonna bring this up a little bit closer. And click on preview. This is a plist file. So this is a specific type of plist file. This one's an NSKeyed archiver plist file. So I'm gonna wanna click through this, and I know what I'm looking for. So I'm gonna go to this item 1 here. And this is my Starbucks purchase. I did it on January 8th, at about 1,500 hours. These are UTC times, I might add. I spent about $4.51. I think it was like a small latte or something like that. I got 8 points for it and earned 8.5 stars. We have a store number here. Potentially you can use this store number to figure out exactly which Starbucks I purchased that latte at. But there is a lot of useful information in here. So don't go into Apollo thinking it's going to answer all of your questions. You know, I'm biased. I think it's great. I think there's a lot of information in there, but you still have to go back and do investigative analysis in other different sources. You know, go to the third-party applications. in this case to answer some of those questions. Now let's talk about Chick-fil-A. So after Starbucks, I went to Chick-fil-A and I needed a spicy chicken sandwich. In the application, I have transaction histories. In order to use the application, the Chick-fil-A app to order food, you have to load it up with funds. So in order to do that, you have to go into the application. You have to say, I want to load it from Apple Pay here. How much would you like to add? I added, I think it was $10, or excuse me, no, sorry, $15. So I did the other, and it put it on my virtual Chick-fil-A One card here. I now notice have the current balance of $7.06. So this is where that $15 transaction came from. I used my Amex card to transfer $15 to the Chick-fil-A One card, and then I went and purchased my spicy chicken sandwich. Now, if I go into some of the Chick-fil-A data, it's a little bit more tricky to look for this information, but it is being stored in there. So I never looked at Chick-fil-A application before. You know, I don't know how much investigative value that might have in many investigations, but it shows me that this information is available. So I went digging in there and I saw that it was being stored in a Realm database. We don't get to see Realm databases too often. I've been noticing a lot of random third-party apps are starting to store their data in Realm databases versus SQLite databases. So be aware that those are going to become an issue at some point. So I'm using the Realm database viewer here to show you the spicy chicken meal sandwich that I had ordered. So $7.49. I also got the waffle fries, a Diet Coke, and it's in a different table, but of course I had to get the zesty buffalo sauce as well. So all of that is being stored in those third-party application databases. So know how your third-party apps work and then go find the data associated with them. So the Passes 23 database is not going to tell me I ordered a spicy chicken sandwich. I have to go to additional data to provide that context. All right, so I went to all these places. Where was I? Perhaps the Passes 23 didn't have location. How can I find the location of these different places? How long did I spend in each place? Did I go anywhere else between these purchases? Maybe not purchase anything. So I'm going to focus on some more of the location-specific modules here. I'm going to touch a little bit about CarPlay, Location D, as well as Routine D. But I want to keep in mind, this activity was about 3 weeks after I collected this data. So location data, it peters out over a period of time. It's great within a week, and after that, it keeps getting less and less and less. So this one happened about 3 weeks ago, but we can still potentially get some information. I'm gonna go back to Apollo. Bring this down. I'm gonna go look at the knowledge section here. So this is the Knowledge C database. And I am looking for device CarPlay connection. So I have 8 different connections here. Now, one word of note here. You're going to notice I see connected, I see disconnected, and it looks kind of funky. Sort. Always sort. So in this case, I'm going to sort by the start time here. See some connections on day after Christmas, one on the 7th, and on the 8th. So the 3 that I'm concerned with, because I got this information from my transaction data, are the ones on January 8th. So again, about 3 weeks after I collected this data. I collected the data on January 20th to give you an idea. So I have a connection, a disconnect, and a connected. I have time in seconds. I've converted that into minutes, so it gives you a better time frame of what that commute actually was. Days of week, GMT offsets, that is all stuff that you might see within the knowledge database. And all these other modules, they have a lot of the same look and feel. So I take my iPhone, I get into my car, I plug it in. That is a connection right here. I do my drive. In this case, it was about a 23-minute drive. I disconnect it and I go do my purchases. I go to Target, I go to Starbucks, you know, what have you. I do my Chick-fil-A. Let's see. So I got this disconnection time here. This one's about 114 minutes, so just under 2 hours or so while I'm running my errands and eating my lunch. And then I get back into my car, connect it back up, and drive back home. That one, maybe traffic was a little bit lighter. We're looking at about 17 minutes in there. So this is assuming you plug it in when you go and you unplug it when you leave the car. You know, something that I think most iPhone CarPlay users might do. Got to get your iTunes, you got to get your maps, you know, your applications on there. So it is quite useful. So this doesn't really tell me where it is. It just tells me that it was connected through CarPlay. It kind of gives me a better time frame of when during this day was I in a particular location. So I would really focus on this disconnect time here, these 2 hours, trying to figure out what happened. As far as other location information, want to take a look at Routine D. So this one is an awesome module for location. It's extremely granular location information. However, the trick to this one is that you have to get this device within a week of whatever happened, whatever you're investigating. Otherwise, it gets flushed. All those locations, they get removed from the device. So if I'm sorting here, again, by timestamp, it only goes back to January 13th. If I'm curious what happened on the 8th, it is not going to be in this output. We're going to revisit this one a little bit later on, but data retention is a thing for a lot of this Apollo output. So I'm going to go to another one, Location D. And I can see a few other things in here. Now, this is not going to give me GPS coordinates, but I can get step counts. So maybe I can calculate how far did somebody go, motion state, whether the device was moving or not. I'm going to talk about these more in depth a little bit later on. However, again, these are still limited. They only go back about 7 to 10 days from that. So all of a sudden, locations really kind of go away. There is one more under Routine D that I do want to go to. So if it's been flushed from this ZRTCL location mode table here, a lot of the times, if the operating system thinks it's a significant or recent location, it's going to be populated into another database. So we're going to take a look at maybe a cloud map item, or actually let's look at cloud visit entry. These are going to be more or less some significant locations. So it's basically whatever algorithm it's using, it's saying, I think this one is significant. I think this one is significant. So the list is quite a bit less here. But if I sort by visit entry, so it's basically keeping track of when I go into a place, when I leave a place. If I look on the 8th, I have 2 locations on the 8th. I scroll over here. It's going to give me some general idea of where these locations are. It's in the US, one's in Falls Church, one's in Arlington, one's Arlington Boulevard, specifically Wilson Center if it's an area of interest, and all the information associated with that. So this particular entry are those 2 hours where I'm doing my shopping and eating lunch. So I can kind of use that. So I'll take this one and I'll map that. So I have my geolocation coordinates. I took these and I mapped them already. So I put those into maps and shows it right here. So this is Wilson Center. This is in Seven Corners area of the DC metro area, if you've ever been there. There's a Target over here. There's a shopping center over here. I think it's a Safeway. But there's a lot of stuff going on here. So this is where I spent those 2 hours. The star in the middle here, this is approximately where I parked at that time. So it kind of tells you, all right, what am I doing here? I have my location, I have a time frame, I have a few transaction numbers here, so you can kind of plot in time what the user was potentially doing. So I parked, again, right about here in the middle, and I walked to PetSmart. I bought something for my cat as a Christmas gift. He did not appreciate it, so I ended up returning it. So about 5 to 10 minutes at PetSmart. No transactions there, so we don't see a whole lot of activity surrounding that. Then I walked over to Target. I recently sprained my ankle, so I had to go buy an ankle brace for that one. This is the purchase, $9.99. So I got that one at Target. We have the transaction timestamp for that. Decided I needed a cup of coffee. So there's 2 Starbucks, because of course there's 2 Starbucks. Which Starbucks did I go to? Well, we looked at that SBX history file. We have that store ID number. Potentially we can go and look that up into some outsourced database somewhere. But because if I just had to guess that geolocation data point that I found, I might think that it's probably this Starbucks. In fact, that is the Starbucks that I went to, the one that's basically embedded into the Safeway location there. So I sat there for a few minutes, did some work, had my latte. Then I decided, you know what, it's lunchtime. I'm hungry. I need my spicy chicken sandwich. Chick-fil-A looks great. It's right there. So I hobbled my way over to Chick-fil-A, ate my sandwich, ordered from my app. They actually called my test device's name, and I honestly forgot what name it was. I almost missed my lunch, but eventually I got it, and I had my spicy chicken sandwich. So start correlating all of this information. Third-party apps, Apollo data, all these different databases can help tell the story of what is going on. All right, do I have any questions before I get into the next scenario?
Hey, Sarah, we've had a few questions come in, so let's start with, how did you extract location data out of BlackLight for mapping?
So as far as the mapping goes, for the screenshots that I had in this particular section, I more or less just copied the Latin long out of them and put them into Google Maps. So these screenshots are all in Google Maps. I'm going to show you an example in the next section about exporting that out using BlackLight's export utility and then importing them into Google Earth to get a better view for that. So wait for that one.
Great. And are deleted wallet items like airplane boarding passes shown?
So airplane passes are absolutely shown if they're being logically stored in there. If they were deleted, because this is a SQLite database, I think that they might be recoverable. This is not something I've looked into yet, but certainly can take a look at. Because that is something that people certainly do. They take a flight, they don't need the ticket anymore, they remove it from their systems. So that is something I am still researching.
Perfect. And how can you see if a payment was verified? For example, can you see if it was Face ID or passcode?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I have some ideas of how I would research that one. It's actually using a different database called the Aggregate Dictionary database, but it is not something that I have looked into yet. I'm not saying it's not there, but I need to do some research surrounding that one.
Got it. And last question before we move on, does the carved data in Apollo plugins refer to the source file? So for example, the name and the path of the PLA SQLite that the data is parsed from?
Yeah, the module names, let me flip over to those. The module names itself, right here, this is more or less the name of the database. It's not perfect the way that it's parsing out here, but like power log is the power log, passes 23, net usage. Location D, if I click through some of these, I actually call the module cached encrypted AB because it's sometimes cache encrypted A or cache encrypted B, depending on what iOS version you're looking at. So it's not perfect, but it should give you the general idea of what that database name is called. Like knowledge is actually a knowledge C database, so it's close, but not quite perfect. And you can go to the different modules within the Apollo GitHub to actually get the detailed information for that.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
All for now?
Yep, we can move on for now.
All right, so let's do scenario 2. So this one's distracted driving. I've had a lot of folks come to me saying, hey, Apollo is great. It really helped me with a distracted driving case. And there's quite a few different modules that can help put this one together. So a few questions we might want to answer. First, was the device actually in a car? We don't know if the user of the device was driving or not. Maybe with surveillance, we can figure that out, but we can see how fast it was moving, whether it was parked, whether it was in DC traffic, also parked, or whether it was going 75 miles per hour down the Beltway. We can also see what applications were being used. This is useful, especially if you are in an accident, it's a single person in a car. You know, there's nobody else using that phone except that driver. So were they using it through CarPlay, or were they using it as the device itself? Were they distracted doing that? So not every application is available when it is in CarPlay mode. And the third thing is audio. Were they rocking out to some podcast or some Lizzo or something on there? You know, we can see what the audio volume was, the content, and start correlating with that. So first thing is going back to, again, one of my favorite modules is that routine D cache, the ZRT CL location mo. I didn't name this. This is what the table name is within that database, the cache database. So we can blame Apple for these weird sounding names. But this is the one that has that granular location for a week. What it also does is that it includes speed. Let me go back to it. Close this one. So I'm in the ZRT CL location mode. I'm going to sort by my timestamp here. And I'm specifically looking at this table. Let me zoom in just a little bit so we can see it here. So this speed is being calculated, and it's being stored in meters per second. But I've also calculated out to another column because it makes more sense for me to look at it in miles per hour. I don't know what 7 meters per second truly is, but I know what 16 miles an hour actually is. So during this time, the original value for these in the database is -1, meaning it is not tracking speed at this time. When I went in and I looked at this data, this is me in my plane seat going off to California for the black bag all hands meeting a couple weeks ago. So there is no speed being tracked here. As soon as I land and as soon as it picks up signal and Wi-Fi and whatnot, then it starts recording what the speed actually is. So we see 16 miles per hour, 20, down to things like 8, 3, 2. Now a normal person walking, I know when I'm walking, I'm about at a, I don't know, anywhere between 3 and 3.5 miles per hour, depending on if I'm, power walking or not. So if you see some speeds that are a little bit higher, there is no way I could possibly walk at 20 miles per hour. My legs do not go that fast. So you might be able to get a feeling for if the device is on a person or if it's in a vehicle or what have you. Maybe they're on one of those electric scooters. We don't know. But this is something that can give you an idea of the speed of this particular device. Now, unfortunately, again, 1 week worth of information. So if this event happened a week after you or a week before you collected this data, you're not going to be able to see the speed, unfortunately, in there. So I'm going to switch to a different scenario. I'm going to tell you about a weekend that I had in San Francisco. So the R&D team, after our team all hands went to San Francisco for the weekend and just sort of, walked around, met up with friends, ate a lot of food. So kind of that sort of feeling. So these locations, quite useful. I can select, and I've only selected a few here, but I've selected them for a whole weekend. If I right click, export selected location data as KMZ or KML. I exported them as a KMZ file because these can be a lot of data points. You want kind of a more compressed file for those, and then loaded them up into Google Earth. So that's how I got these particular locations. Otherwise, for a lot of the other screenshots, I more or less just click these geolocation coordinates and plop them into Google Maps. So let me show you my adventures. So I've already exported this KMZ. I've loaded it into Google Earth here. So now I can kind of go around and see what all did this device go to. I'm not going to go through every location here, but give or take around this cluster is where our hotel was at. We went down, walked down here. This is actually an Apple store. We walked to around the Apple store. We didn't know there was an Apple store. We just sort of came upon it. And we walked up through Chinatown, up through here. We had dinner near the Transamerica building, the pyramid, the big pointy one. And then we made our way back home, back to the hotel. The next morning, we went out, basically crossed the city, had an awesome Chinese meal over here. Very hot, we ordered way too much, and then decided it was a good idea to take a walk. So we took a walk. You can see us walking up this street. A lot of the times, the distance between the data points will tell you, are they driving or are they walking, depending on how often you see a data point in there. So this is driving. We are in an Uber here, and these are walking. So we're hanging out in the park. I start a workout here. This is why you see quite a few more data points. When you do a workout, it wants to see your location, and it's tracking all of that type of data. We get tired. It's an uphill walk. So we take an Uber back. kind of working our way around the city here, back to the hotel, and we even went down here, visited a friend in Soma, and then went back. So you can kind of see a pattern here. You can see how long you're hanging out in certain locations, which locations are you frequenting. And this kind of data is available for about a week or so. Now, on some devices, I have seen this to be upwards of 40,000 data points for a week. So this is a lot of information. From personal experience, you'll want to select it by a particular time because Google Earth will not be able to intake 40,000 data points. So heads up with that one. All right, so that was our weekend in San Francisco. We ate a lot of food. All right, at the end of this, and I didn't show you this particular data point, but the last one here, right before we left, was in the San Francisco airport. So I'm flying back home. I live in the DC area, so I'm flying back to Dulles. So what happens if whatever circumstances is that we don't have this information anymore? We don't have this granular information. What other location data is available? So we have, again, some routine D. We have some significant locations. If you've ever looked up your significant locations in your own iOS device, you can see it's not every single location you've ever been to in the last 3 years, but it's what Apple thinks is significant or recent. So we can see some in Northern Virginia. We see some in San Francisco. And if we click through them, we can get even more details like which restaurants did we go to and that. And also don't forget about third-party application data. If I'm running a Maps application or if I take pictures, all that is going to have some sort of perhaps metadata about what location I'm actually going to. Now, just another one was the device moving. So we don't care about location per se. We just want to know, is the device sitting on the desk or was it actually moving with the user, like in their back pocket or something like that. So a couple of different places we can get this information. The motion state history from location D is going to tell you if it's in a vehicle or not. It tries to guess. Sometimes it is spot on. Sometimes it really doesn't have a clue. So watch it with that one. And then we have location D, step count history. And we can look at the pace column for that one. Again, no geolocation specifically. So let's go take a look at these. Before I get into some of the non-geo ones, I want to just again show you some of the significant location ones. I was already there, the cloud visit entries and exits. You see a lot of the same locations in those screenshots in there. Some of them are in Northern Virginia, some of them are in San Francisco. Map item has quite a few of them too. Each one of these, they might have some timestamps, some geolocation, some protobufs embedded into them. So there's quite a bit of data in here. So you can click through some of those. Now this is only about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks worth of data, and I have about 33 different significant locations. So some pretty interesting stuff there. And we also have learn locations. They're all just a little bit different. They all kind of work together. So let's go ahead and take a look at those two location D databases. First one is motion state. So I'm going to sort this one. And I'm going to basically go to the end of the list here. So I am looking at this one is the is vehicular. Oops, zoom in a little bit. So this is vehicular, 0 non, or at least not detected as vehicular, 1 yes, I'm in a vehicle of some sort. So I am going to kind of click on this one. So at about 1:35, again, UTC timeframes, this is about 8:40, let me see, my plane landed at about 8:45, so this is about 10 minutes before before we were in the plane. So see, it is vehicular. We see a 1 here. So we landed on Dulles, on the tarmac, at about 1:35 because we were taxiing during this time. So this whole time frame right here, it's about 10 minutes long, yep, 1:35 to about 1:46, is us in a vehicle, granted it is a plane, taxiing down the runway to get to the gate. If I scroll by this a little bit, again, we're looking at this one that I have highlighted here. It's all non-vehicular movement. And again, I am back in some sort of vehicle at about 2:19 to about 2:45. And this is actually my commute home. So I get through Dulles, pick up my baggage, get into the taxi line, and take a taxi home. So you can kind of get a feeling for how long that was there. So this can be quite useful. We don't have geolocation coordinates, but I can see if it detects if I'm in a vehicle or not. So this one I'm still doing quite a bit of research on to kind of get some accuracy points in here, but just looking at this data here, quite useful. So let's take a look at the other one, step count history. So this one's keeping track of your steps. It only goes back so far, so it only goes back to about the 12th here, so just over 7 days worth of time. But this one is neat because it's keeping track of pace. So pace meaning, is the device moving or is it not moving? No geolocation coordinates. So I'm going to click through and I'm going to find that that time frame when I got off the plane from Dulles. So just give me one moment here. It's going to want to go crazy on the scrolling. Come on. There's a lot of data points, a lot of steps taken, even with a sprained ankle. There we go. All right, so what, about 1:46 is when I got off the plane. Yeah, about 1:48. So we stopped taxiing, a couple minutes later, we got off the plane. Oops. You zoom in just ever so slightly. So I am looking at this pace column right here. So I'm moving, I'm walking off the plane. You see this first section here of zeros? This means the device is not moving. So at this point, I've calculated this time frame out best as I could. This is the first escalator at Dulles. So I'm just standing on the escalator. No, I'm not walking. I'm one of those people. Let's see. This little section right here, the second escalator. Waiting for that train shuttle thing to come by, walking on that. Walking to baggage. Oh, there's another little escalator in here as well, up to baggage. This one here, I believe, is a restroom break. Not to get too personal. Let's see, this one's probably waiting for baggage in here. And then I think I'm waiting in a taxi line and getting my taxi about here. So you can see these periods of activity, these start and stops. You know, I'm walking in some, and then I'm standing in others, waiting for baggage, waiting for trains, waiting on escalators. So if that movement is useful, you know, try to take a look at that particular database there. Oops. All right. So kind of give you an idea, just plotting some of those data points out. So I did have some of those geolocation coordinates. I can plot myself at Dulles. I can even put myself in the taxi line right outside of Dulles here. And I can see pretty much my commute all the way down to Arlington. So about a 40-minute commute, give or take. And I can follow that path all the way down to 67 and 66 if you're familiar with the DC area. So some good information there. All right, next up, what applications were used? So we have some Apollo modules that keep track of all the app data. I'm not going to go through every one of these because some of them are more interesting than others, but I am going to go and take a look at the app in focused one. So this is all the knowledge C information. This is one of my favorites. This is keeping track of what application a user has in focus. So what application are they using right then, that they're looking at. So we get start time, we get end times, we get the usage in seconds here, and the bundle ID. So this is been sorted basically down to when I first started the device. We get the purple buddy process, that's the registration process. I go into health, preferences, app store, and whatnot. So I can scroll through here, and I can figure out, what application is the user using most often? Are they on Twitter all the time? They're looking at my device? Yeah, I'm on Twitter all the time. I can see when they're in CarPlay, I can see when they're in iTunes, all that very useful information. So I would go find that time where I'm in the car and I know I'm in the car, see if there's any applications outside of the ones that are for CarPlay. If I see Facebook on there, likely the user is going to be a little bit distracted. You know, they might be updating their posts or whatnot. One more that I do want to mention. This is a power log app usage. So different databases have different data retention periods. So we have Knowledge C, that's going to keep track of about 4 weeks worth of app and focus information. And then we have power log app usage. This one's going to keep about 3 days worth of information. So power log is a little bit different. Power log is a strange database altogether, but you do see some of the similar information. This one's going to show you a lot more of the screen information like lock screen and passcodes and control center type stuff, which could also potentially be quite useful as well, but you only get about 3 days worth of that. A couple other mentions for the power log, because it is a weird one, is that there are archives. Currently right now, Apollo, either through my Python script or through BlackLight, doesn't do anything with these gzip files. So these are just gzipped archived versions of the current power log. So if you are looking for something that happened 6, 7, 8, 9 days in the past, you'll want to go open those particular databases in there. Great thing about Apollo modules is that I give you all the queries. So if you're looking for something in particular, you can copy and paste these queries out into the database viewer of your choice and run them as each individual queries. PowerLog is a little bit different. This one has adjusted timestamps. So PowerLog, some tables have timestamps that are off by a few seconds, a few minutes. It really depends on the device. So there's some SQL kind of foo going on here to try to make up for that. It's not perfect. It might be off by 1, 2, 3 seconds, but it should be pretty close without programmatically going in there and changing that. But just a heads up with some of the PowerLog ones. You can usually see those because they'll have 1, 2, 3 different selects in the query there. They're a little bit more complex than other queries. Next up is audio as a distraction. Again, not going to go through every single one of these, but I do want to show you some of my favorites. Going back to the Knowledge C database, I might look for audio media now playing. Again, I'm going to sort by time here. This is going to show you what was playing on the device. I have some podcast app going on here. You can see which podcast. I'm listening to a lot of Planet Money and NPR. If I keep scrolling down here, you'll see I have NPR News, I have Pandora, even watching some videos potentially with the Messages application. You can see all that type of information in here. So again, correlate that when the user was supposedly driving. Doesn't make sense. You know, were they watching videos while they were driving? I hope not, but you know, it can certainly happen. Other ones to take a look at are speaker outputs. You know, this is another quick way to determine was the thing connected to CarPlay or not. So I was listening to some NPR, some music, connect up my AirPod Pros. So you see that kind of going on and off here. If you're in CarPlay, you're going to see CarPlay and car audio in here as well. So some things to certainly take a look at. All right, any questions before I get to the last mini module?
Yes, we've had some more great questions come in as you've been talking. So let's start with, how can we combine Apollo data with other case data in BlackLight? Or more specifically, how can I show where the data I found is exactly on the file system for a presentation to a court, for instance?
So as far as the Apollo data is concerned, every Apollo module should, and if it doesn't, please let me know, should, if I can scroll over here without changing the window, should have a table here showing you the original entry to the original database. So if you ever need to go see if there's anything else worth pulling for that entry, because I'm not extracting everything, you could always go find the originals here. So you can go take this data, go find the Knowledge C, you know, do your file filter for Knowledge C, and you'll find the databases associated with that. So you can actually perform your own queries on there. You can see if I'm, missing a couple of columns that could be forensically useful. If you do find anything, of course, please let me know so I can add those into the modules. So you can always go back and forth.
Sarah, we might have lost some of your audio. If you want to try and reconnect for a second.
Like exit and reconnect.
There we go.
Is it back?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Should I re-answer that question?
Please.
Okay. So to get the, go back into the plugins here, all the Apollo modules should have this number at the end of the entries here, a table ID for whatever table it's extracting that information from. So I can always go back to the original table, find that primary or ID number associated with it. Maybe go to File, Filter, look for Knowledge C, bring up that table, and go find that primary keyword it's pulling that information from. So you can always go back and forth between these.
Thank you. All right, next question. Does the retention period of transactions pause if the phone immediately goes into airplane mode? And is there any way to recap which data is lost within the 7 to 10 day time range?
So I'll answer the deleted data one first. So if it is deleted, there is always the potential to potentially get it out of a SQLite database. It really depends on how the database is set up, whether there's, if it overwrites that pretty quickly. So I'm not saying it's not impossible. I've not actually looked into that yet, but I do feel like forensically, you could potentially extract some of those deleted entries from that. Now, first part of the question is, what happens when it goes into airplane mode? So, it depends. Sometimes it can still, it's still recording a lot of information. Perhaps it's not always going to record some geolocation-based information, so you might lose some of that. But what you'll often find is that there's these weird time jumps of it was recording somewhere and now it's not recording for, say 5 hours for a cross-country flight. So you kind of have to correlate that with other activity on the device. Do you know if they were traveling? Do you have an airplane pass where you can see the flight information in there? So it's all a matter of correlation and trying to figure out what's going on.
Great, so that's kind of along the same lines with the next point. If the user turns off location tracking, will we still see location points?
So that's a kicker. No, if they turn off location services, these are not going to be recorded. Not the really good ones anyway. You still might have some of the, some of the third-party applications. If they've allowed GPS or location services to use with their camera, it could still potentially be in there. So it really depends on how they've configured location services. But if they turn all of it off, you're not going to have a whole lot of location information at all.
That makes sense. And next question, if certain apps have more frequent location requests, will we see more location points like we saw with the workout?
Potentially. I've mostly seen this only with the workout data. So when I start a workout on my Apple Watch, all of a sudden it just wants to sample over and over and over. What's the GPS location? What's the GPS location? So I found it mostly with the workout activity, but I've not looked into a lot of the other applications just yet. So it does have potential.
Got it. And another great question, on the escalator, is there a provision for altitude in the app? If so, can this be used to determine the approximate floor level or where someone may reside or visit?
That's something I would actually love to study is, how tall an escalator is or how many floors that I work up on. I do believe the data is being stored in some of these databases. There is absolutely altitude in here. I don't know the accuracy so much for that. There are floors climbed in some of these databases. So I bet you could put that together if needed be. Yeah, that would be really interesting.
Nice. That would be really interesting to see. You can keep going and we'll see what other questions come in on your next set.
Awesome. Speaking about climbing floors, maybe I have to do it for my deeper fit. Go climb a mountain and track the data for it. So last scenario, very quick. New year, new you. Anybody doing the deeper challenge? On Twitter, you know the hashtag D4Fit. It's where we get a chance to get out there and not do computer stuff and just, have a good workout, a walk, a run, what have you. So I have an Apple Watch associated with this particular test device, and I've been going on a few different workouts. I'm the weird person on the trail that has 2 watches, my own personal watch and a test watch, because that's what I do for data population. So a couple of different apps that you'll see this in from the iOS perspective. You'll get the Apple Health app as well as the Activity app. So the Activity is more or less keeping track of specific workout information versus the Apple Health app, which has a lot of the other stuff, the noise, the mindfulness, the nutrition. If you have a dietary app associated with it, all that data goes into the Apple Health application. Now, all the data that's being stored in these 2 apps is actually coming from a single database called HealthDB Secure.db. So I wrote a lot of different modules. I'm not going to go through each one of those just to keep this quick. But we have the Apple Health Activity if you're looking for specific workouts. So if I start a workout on my watch, a walk, a run, a whatever, it's going to start recording. It's going to say, where was I? Is it indoor? Is it outdoor? Heart rate, weather, cadence, elevation, calories, all that stuff is being stored in that particular database. Even locations are being stored in there too. I don't parse those out just yet. I have the end and the start and the end, but it's the middle where I'm still doing some research for that one. So the next thing is the Apple Health. So everything else, I wear my Apple Watch all day long. It is constantly keeping track of my heart rate, whether I'm standing or not, whether I'm doing my breathing exercises, my EKG tests, all of that is potentially being recorded and extractable from here. So a few of the different modules that I'm already extracting: steps, difference, steps, distance, stance, heart rate, ECG, weight, and this is not just Apple Watch information. If you have third-party applications, your Strava, your Fitbit, your whatever, your Garmin, different devices, so third-party apps and devices, if it's being stored within the Apple Health or if it integrates with Apple Health, you're likely going to find some evidence associated with those apps and devices in here. So keep track of those. Now, one thing I do want to mention, when you're in the Apple Health modules, and this one is particular, this one kind of I get some questions on every once in a while, is why do I see different steps for different time periods or the same time period overlapping? So this is an example of one of these. One recorded 1070 and one recorded 920, and it's about the same time frame. What the heck is going on here? Well, that's data sources. So because I have an Apple Watch, I also have an iPhone. Each one is keeping track of steps and it's recording them separately. So if you do see something like that, it's worth investigating a little bit more, try to get an idea of which device did this particular piece of data come from. So that's why you see a little bit of funkiness going on there. And then finally, distance and heart rate. I always have the example of, dragging a dead body. I have a great video of Heather dragging her husband, who's not dead, who's very well alive, at least last I checked. But different modules, and putting these modules together can get a good feeling for what the user is doing. Were they, running, or were they, doing a slow walk? If I have my sprained ankle, I'm not exactly walking all that fast. Also, if you put a overlay heart rate onto that, do I have a nice resting heart rate, or is it being pegged? Is it getting really high up because I'm either working out or again dragging that body? I have a lot of different events here that you can kind of correlate together. Now, the health database is likely going to be one of the larger, data-wise, larger databases because it's constantly keeping track. As far as data retention goes, this is the best one because it wants to keep your health data so you can look at it historically over time. Great for us as forensic examiners as well. All right, so that is the presentation. If there's any other questions, I'll take them in a moment. But here's my contact information. If you've got any other questions about Apollo and BlackLight, please let me know. I'm on Twitter. The GitHub is there if you want to peruse those Apollo modules. And if you're curious about all the different blogs that I write, I have my Mac Forensics website as well. I have written quite a few different articles on different Apollo modules. So pretty much go in there and search Apollo, and you'll see quite a few different articles. So I hope you enjoyed it. And are there any last questions?
Thanks, Sarah. We had a few more we'll answer, and then if there's anything else we didn't get to, we can respond individually as a follow-up. So some that came in that were really interesting, let's see. Is similar data available for Android devices?
So technically, yes. It's sometimes considered more difficult to get to. It's not being stored in nice SQLite databases, generally speaking. It's being stored in different files, and there's protobufs and stuff involved. So I guess the quick answer is yes, but not as nice.
Perfect. And second question here, do the locations of the information for Apollo change from one iOS version to the next? And will we just see new tables show up in plugins in the future?
Everything changes all the time. So Apple releases a new operating system, and sometimes things change and sometimes they don't change. So things like call history they haven't changed in 4 or 5 different versions, but things like the location databases has absolutely changed almost every version of iOS. So they'll add new tables, they'll add new columns, new schemas, new blob formats. So just they're always constantly changing. And I try to update Apollo as quickly to take into consideration some of those changes, especially on the major updates, but sometimes it's by point release as well. So if you do run Apollo and you find something doesn't quite work or just doesn't parse out correctly, drop me a line, send me a note on which version, which module, which database, and I'll certainly take a look at it.
Excellent. Well, we are a little bit over the hour mark here, so we will wrap up for today, but a big thank you to Sarah for walking us through how to use Apple Pattern of Life data in your investigations with Apollo and BlackLight. Again, for anyone who submitted a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it live, we can reach out and follow up individually. Also, we will be sending out the recording, so stay tuned for that. And if you're interested in learning more about any of our products or services, you can email sales@blackbagtech.com, and make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn at BlackBagTech, and subscribe to our blog at our website at blackbagtech.com. Thank you again, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.